What we are actually witnessing is the quiet, methodical completion of a strategic deterrence architecture that has been decades in the making. One that fundamentally changes the military calculus in the Middle East, not tomorrow, not in 5 years, but right now, today, in the ground beneath Iran's mountains and deserts. I have been looking at a series of recent disclosures, some from Iranian state media, some from independent defense analysts, and some, remarkably, from Western military institutions themselves, and what they collectively reveal is not a country on the edge of military collapse under the weight of sanctions and pressure. What they reveal is a country that built something extraordinary while the world was busy counting its inflation rate and predicting its imminent downfall. In the next 20 minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly what has been confirmed, exactly why Western strategic planners are alarmed in ways they are not saying publicly, and exactly why this development reshapes the entire threat calculus across the Persian Gulf, Israel, and the broader region. This is not speculation. This is not propaganda from either direction. These are documented facts that deserve serious analysis, the kind of analysis you are not going to get from a 2-minute segment on cable television. Let us start with some foundational context, because understanding what Iran has built requires understanding why it was built. And that story begins not with missiles, but with geography and memory. Iran is a country of approximately 1.65 million square kilometers. It shares borders with 15 countries and two major bodies of water. But what matters more than its size is its geological character. Iran is one of the most mountainous countries on Earth. The Zagros mountain range alone stretches more than 1,500 kilometers across the western and southwestern portions of the country. The Alborz range runs along the northern border near the Caspian Sea. These are not gentle hills. These are deep, ancient mountain systems with natural cave formations, hard rock structures, and underground geology that military engineers consider among the most favorable in the world for subterranean construction. Iran's leadership understood something after the Iran-Iraq War of the 1,980 seconds that has shaped every major military decision made in Tehran since. That war, which killed between 500,000 and 1 million Iranians depending on the source, demonstrated with brutal clarity that Iran cannot rely on surface-based military assets in a sustained conflict against a heavily armed adversary with external support. Iraqi Scud missiles hit Iranian cities. Iranian Air Force assets were destroyed on the ground. Supply lines were disrupted. The lesson was not lost. According to multiple defense analysts, including those writing for Jane's Defense Weekly and the International Institute for Strategic Studies in London, Iran began a systematic program of underground military infrastructure development in the late 1980 seconds and accelerated that program significantly after the American invasion of Iraq in 2003. What happened in Baghdad in 2003 was, for Iranian strategic planners, not a lesson in American power. It was a lesson in the catastrophic consequences of having no credible deterrent. Stay with me here because this historical foundation is not background noise. It is the key to understanding everything that has been revealed in recent months. The United States has spent the better part of 2 decades employing what is called bunker buster munitions, the GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator, a 30,000-pound bomb designed specifically to destroy hardened underground facilities. The GBU-57 can penetrate approximately 60 meters of reinforced concrete before detonating. That is an extraordinary capability, and Iran's military architects knew about it, planned around it, and built accordingly. Announcement number 1. The underground missile cities are real, they are operational, and their scale has now been confirmed at a level that was previously described only in estimated or speculative terms. In February of 2024, Iranian state television broadcast footage from what commanders of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps described as an underground missile facility. The footage showed kilometers of tunnel corridors carved into bedrock, housing ballistic missiles on mobile launchers within the tunnels themselves. The IRGC Aerospace Force commander at the time, Brigadier General Amir Ali Hajizadeh, stated publicly that Iran possesses what he called missile cities beneath the ground, plural, not singular. What makes this announcement number 1 is not the footage itself. What makes it significant is what independent corroboration now tells us about scale. The Center for Strategic and International Studies, based in Washington, operates a program called the Missile Defense Project. Their analysts, reviewing satellite imagery, seismic monitoring data, and open-source intelligence, have assessed that Iran has constructed multiple hardened underground facilities specifically designed for missile storage and launch preparation. These are not storage warehouses. These are operational, launch-ready facilities with the infrastructure to fuel, arm, prepare, and launch missiles directly from underground positions. According to reporting confirmed by Reuters and referenced in analyses by the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, Iran's ballistic missile arsenal is now estimated at somewhere between 3,000 and 3,500 delivery systems of various ranges. The figure of 80,000 precision-guided munitions, including shorter-range rockets, cruise missiles, and ballistic systems across all categories, appears in assessments from multiple Western defense institutions when the full inventory, including IRGC ground force assets, is counted. Let that number sit for a moment. 80,000, not 800, not 8,000. 80,000 munitions of varying precision and range, dispersed across a country the size of Western Europe's largest nations, housed in facilities designed to survive everything except a direct nuclear strike. Commander Daniel Dolan, a retired U.S. Navy officer who has written extensively on Iranian naval and missile capabilities, has described Iran's underground missile architecture as, and I am referencing his published assessment directly here, a system specifically designed to survive first strike scenarios and retain second strike capacity. That is the precise language of nuclear deterrence strategy being applied to conventional munitions. That is how serious Western analysts are taking this. Announcement number 2. The precision guidance revolution within that arsenal is the development that changes everything strategically, and it is the element that receives the least coherent coverage in Western media. A missile with a circular error probable, the technical term for accuracy, of 500 meters is a weapon capable of destroying infrastructure in a general area. It is disruptive, it is damaging, but it is not strategically decisive against hardened military targets. A missile with a circular error probable of 10 meters is an entirely different weapon. It can hit a specific building, a specific hangar, a specific naval vessel in port, a specific radar installation. The difference between those two accuracy figures is not a matter of degree. It is a categorical transformation in what the weapon can accomplish. Iran began a systematic program to retrofit and upgrade existing missile stocks with precision guidance systems approximately 15 years ago. According to assessments published by the International Institute for Strategic Studies and referenced in congressional testimony before the House Armed Services Committee, Iran has successfully converted a significant portion of its previously unguided rocket arsenal into precision-guided munitions. The Fateh 110 series, the Zulfiqar, the Dezful, these are Iranian-developed precision ballistic missiles with ranges between 300 and 1,000 kilometers and accuracy figures that Western analysts assess at between 5 and 30 meters circular error probable. To put that in perspective, American Tomahawk cruise missiles, which represent the gold standard of Western long-range precision strike, have a circular error probable of approximately 10 meters. Iran has developed missiles in that same accuracy band, not as technologically sophisticated in every dimension, but accurate enough to hit what they are aimed at. Stay with me, because this is where the strategic picture becomes impossible to ignore. Announcement number 3, and this is the one that almost nobody in the mainstream conversation is connecting correctly. The dispersal and concealment architecture of these underground facilities means that no known conventional military strike package can comprehensively destroy this capability in a single operation. This is not an Iranian talking point. This is the conclusion that Western defense analysts have been reaching quietly and consistently for years. The problem is not finding the facilities. American and Israeli intelligence have good situational awareness of many of them. The problem is that destroying dispersed, hardened, deeply buried facilities requires either a nuclear weapon, a prolonged and sustained conventional bombing campaign measured in months rather than days, or ground forces operating inside Iran, which presents its own category of strategic nightmare. A 2023 assessment from the RAND Corporation, which is funded primarily by the United States Department of Defense, noted that Iran's underground military infrastructure represents a significant challenge to any attempt at disarmament through military means. The word they used was significant. For Rand, writing for the Pentagon, that is not understatement. That is as close to alarm as that institution typically comes in public documents. According to Bloomberg's reporting on the regional strategic environment, the cost to Iran of constructing this underground infrastructure over 3 decades is estimated at somewhere between $15 and $20 billion. The cost to a potential adversary of attempting to destroy it comprehensively would be measured in a multiple of that figure, while the probability of success would be far below 100% even at enormous expenditure. Now let us talk about what is really happening behind the headlines, because there are 2 stories playing out simultaneously, and the mainstream Western media is, as is often the case, only covering one of them. The story they are covering is the familiar narrative of Iranian aggression, Iranian nuclear ambitions, Iranian proxy networks, and international pressure on Tehran to change its behavior. That story is real in its own way. The nuclear question is genuinely unresolved. The regional tensions are genuine. None of that is fiction. But the story they are not covering, the story that actually matters for understanding what happens next, is the story of what this military infrastructure means for the strategic choices available to every actor in the region. Think carefully about what this means for Israeli military planning. Israel conducted what was described as a significant direct strike on Iranian territory in April and October of 2024. Those strikes, covered extensively across Western media, were presented in much of the commentary as demonstrations of Israeli military reach and Iranian vulnerability. Certain radar systems were damaged. Some air defense components were affected. What the coverage did not explain adequately is the following. Israel did not strike underground missile facilities. It could not, with the munitions in its conventional inventory, guarantee the destruction of deeply buried hardened sites. The GBU-28 bunker buster in Israel's arsenal can penetrate approximately 30 meters of earth. Iran's deepest facilities, according to public assessments from American defense institutions, are buried at depths significantly exceeding that figure. What this means in practice is that Israel demonstrated it can reach Iran. What it could not demonstrate is that it can disarm Iran. And that distinction between the ability to strike and the ability to disarm is the entire strategic question. Think carefully about what this represents. When a country builds 80,000 munitions and stores them in hardened underground facilities dispersed across a territory of 65 million square kilometers, it is not building a first strike force. A first strike force is concentrated, rapidly deployable, and optimized for offensive operations at the opening of a conflict. What Iran has built is a second strike architecture. It is a force specifically designed to survive an initial attack and respond with sufficient volume and precision to make the cost of that initial attack unacceptable to any rational adversary. That is deterrence. Not as a Western talking point and not as an Iranian one. That is the structural logic of what Iran has constructed, evaluated on its own terms. Now, here is where the personal dimension of this analysis becomes impossible to avoid. If you live in the Gulf region, in the UAE, in Kuwait, in Qatar, in Saudi Arabia, and you follow this story, you understand intuitively what Iranian precision-guided missiles at ranges of 1,000 kilometers mean for every piece of infrastructure within that range. Oil terminals, desalination plants, airport facilities, port infrastructure. If you operate a business with logistics moving through the Persian Gulf, and according to the International Energy Agency, approximately 21 million barrels of oil pass through the Strait of Hormuz every single day, then Iran's underground missile architecture is not a foreign policy story. It is a supply chain story. It is an energy price story. It is a cost of doing business story that has not yet been priced into most risk models in any comprehensive way. This is what the discussion is missing. Not the missiles themselves, but what the missiles mean for every calculation made by every actor, military, diplomatic, and economic, operating in this region. This pattern of a smaller, poorer nation building asymmetric deterrence infrastructure to offset the conventional military superiority of a larger power has repeated throughout history. And every time it repeats, the strategic outcome follows a recognizable logic. Consider the Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta. Athens was the dominant naval power. It controlled the sea lanes. Its economy was stronger. Its cultural prestige was unmatched. Sparta could not match Athens in open naval combat and knew it. So, Sparta built a different kind of power. A land force, fortified alliances, a strategy of attrition that exploited Athenian overextension. The war lasted 27 years. Both sides were economically and militarily exhausted by its conclusion. Athens never recovered its previous position of dominance. Sparta won without ever defeating Athens in the arena where Athens was strongest. The parallel to the current situation is not exact. No historical parallel ever is, but the structure is recognizable. Iran is not attempting to match American or Israeli conventional military capability in the domain where those capabilities are strongest. It is building deterrence in a domain, underground, dispersed, hardened, where its adversaries' greatest strengths are least effective. It is making the cost of conflict prohibitive, not by matching power for power, but by making the outcome of any military engagement uncertain enough that rational actors must hesitate before initiating one. Iran is Sparta in this parallel, not in every moral dimension, not in every political dimension, but in the specific strategic dimension of building asymmetric deterrence against a conventionally superior opponent in the domain least susceptible to that opponent's advantages. The question that the historical parallel forces us to ask is, who is the third party watching this standoff exhaust both sides? And the answer to that question should occupy considerably more analytical attention than it currently receives in mainstream coverage. So where does this leave us? Let me give you 3 clear paths forward, because the situation does not have an honest middle ground, and anyone presenting this story as stable or resolved is not giving you an accurate picture. Path 1 is the deterrence equilibrium path. In this scenario, Iran's underground missile architecture performs its design strategic function. The cost and uncertainty of any comprehensive military strike against Iran remains high enough that no actor, not Israel acting unilaterally, not the United States, initiates a conflict intended to destroy that capability. Diplomatic engagement continues fitfully. The nuclear question remains unresolved but managed. Regional actors adapt to a security environment in which Iran is a permanent, armed, deterrence-capable power. This is not a comfortable equilibrium for Israel, for Gulf states, or for American strategic planners. But it is a stable one in the specific sense that it does not produce a catastrophic regional war. I assess the probability of this path as meaningful, perhaps the most likely single outcome over the next 12 to 18 months. Path 2 is the miscalculation path. In this scenario, a crisis, over the nuclear program, over a regional proxy incident, over a miscommunication between military forces, escalates in ways that none of the parties fully control. One or more actors initiates a military exchange believing it can be contained. Iran's underground missile infrastructure responds with the volume and precision it was designed to deliver. Gulf infrastructure sustains damage. Energy markets convulse. American forces in the region are drawn into a conflict none of the parties planned as a full-scale war, but which none of them can exit cleanly. The historical record of regional conflicts in the Middle East does not provide much comfort that miscalculation is an unlikely outcome. I assess this path as genuinely concerning, particularly given the current density of armed actors and the degraded state of the diplomatic communication channels that might otherwise prevent escalation. Path 3 is the negotiated constraint path. In this scenario, the existence of Iran's underground missile arsenal, precisely because it makes military options so costly, creates a new incentive for diplomatic engagement on terms that previous rounds of diplomacy could not achieve. Actors who previously believed military pressure could eventually force Iranian strategic capitulation reckon with the evidence that it has not done so and cannot do so at acceptable cost. A new framework, not necessarily the JCPOA, which is now effectively dead, but something new, emerges that addresses the nuclear question, partially addresses the missile question, and establishes some form of regional security architecture. This path requires political leadership and risk tolerance that I do not currently see in sufficient supply in Washington, Tel Aviv, or Tehran, but it is not impossible. And the existence of 80,000 precision-guided munitions in underground facilities may paradoxically create more space for this conversation than any amount of sanctions pressure has. I think we are currently on the border between Path 1 and Path 2, close enough to equilibrium that catastrophe is not imminent, but with enough unresolved tensions and enough actors operating with incomplete information that the slide toward miscalculation is a genuine and ongoing risk. Here are the questions I want you to take away from this analysis. First, if Iran's underground missile infrastructure is as extensive as the evidence suggests, what does that mean for the credibility of any military solution to the nuclear question? Second, what would a genuine regional security framework need to look like to address the legitimate security concerns of all parties, not just the ones that the current political conversation in Washington is willing to acknowledge? And third, who benefits strategically from a prolonged state of tension that falls short of full-scale war, and are those actors exercising any meaningful influence over the direction of events? Tell me in the comments what path you think we are actually on. Tell me what you think the most underreported dimension of this story is, because I have given you the military architecture in considerable detail, but the diplomatic and economic dimensions deserve their own full analysis. We will keep tracking every development in the Strait of Hormuz, in Tehran, in Tel Aviv, and across the Gulf. That is what this channel does, every single day, with the depth and the honesty that this subject demands. Subscribe now. Share this analysis with everyone in your network who is trying to understand what is actually happening in this region beneath the surface of the daily headlines. Turn on notifications so you do not miss the next update. The ground beneath Iran's mountains is speaking a strategic language that the world's governments understand very clearly. The question is whether the public is being given the tools to understand it too. That is what we are here for. We will see you in the next one.